Hi everyone, I'm back from Mental Training Mondays. My name is Meghan McDonough and I'm a spin sister and I'm a sport and exercise psychology professor at the University of Calgary. And I'm going to be talking today about goal setting. And I want to share three different ideas, big ideas with you and talk through some pieces with them that might help with setting goals, adjusting goals, which we've all had to do a lot lately, and making goals that are going to work for you to really get you where you want to go. So I'm going to get right into it and start sharing something with you here. I want to start by talking about, first, what is your goal about? Okay, and lots of times we have, most of us have sort of at least a vague idea of some things that we want. And what we want to talk about with goal setting is being more intentional and more specific in planning those goals, identifying what they are so that we really know in our own mind, and we can start sort of directing our efforts towards the things, the stepping stones that are going to help us get there. But our first thing is what are our goals? What are our goals about? And you can think about this in terms of anything, like exactly what your goal is really going to be up to you. But I want to talk about three different kinds or categories of goals that we see happen in sport a lot. So first I'll just run through the three. So one is outcome goals. And when I talk about outcome goals, I am talking about any kind of goal that relates to how you compare to others. So this could be things like if you're into racing, I know there's some race team members out there. These are the goals that are things like that you want to get a medal, or that you want to win, or that you want to beat a certain other competitor if you have a nemesis or something like that. But they don't have to only occur in the context of formal competition either. So if you've been on a ride and you have feelings about whether you are going faster than somebody else you're riding with, or even feelings about whether you look like you are working as hard or harder than somebody else you're riding with, or feelings about whether you want to be the first one to admit that you might want to stop and take a break. Those kinds of things actually are all about comparing to other people. So those kind of goals can all fit into that section. I'll come back and talk about them in a minute. Okay, so they're really about how you compare to others, either informal or those sort of informal competition things that can happen anytime we're riding with somebody else. When I talk about performance goals here, what I'm talking about is how you compare to yourself or to your own prior performance. So in that way, these are things like your personal best time, or I know lots of us will have things like Strava or some kind of app on our phones, right? That knows what all our previous times were on a segment, and we're excited when we get the little gold thing that says we have a personal record or something like that, right? So those kinds of things all fall into performance. So my point about Strava there again is this could be something like, a personal best time or something like that in a race situation, but it can also be in just your everyday riding. Okay, and we see that happening more and more with these ways of tracking that. The third category there, process goals, are goals about how you do things. So this is going to be things like your technical goals or tactical goals. Maybe you have a race plan and you want to implement it, and you want, your goal is to stick to the race plan and to remember it and use it well, or things like that. Okay, so processes goals are goals about how you're doing the thing. In this case, it's probably mountain bike riding. Okay, so I want to go back and talk about these three different kinds of goals and sort of the benefits that you might get and some of the drawbacks from these different kinds of goals. So outcome goals are probably the ones that people tend to think about off the top of their head the most, right? Because we're sort of, the way sport is structured, especially in that formal competitive setting, is it tends to set us up to sort of expect us or teach us to set outcome goals about how we compare to other people. Now, those kind of goals can be really motivating, right? Sometimes just knowing that you're going to have a competition coming up can be something that maybe drives you through to stick to your training and things like that through the winter, or those kinds of things, right? They can be very motivating and they can be useful in that way. Okay, but I do want to talk about some of the drawbacks of them, because for a lot of us, we've only sort of set those outcome kinds of goals, or we really rely heavily on those kinds of goals, and they do have some pitfalls. So one of the things about outcome goals, of course, is that they're not in our control. Okay, to some degree they are, right? Because how you compare to others is going to depend on your own performance, right? And the training that you do and how well you ride and that kind of thing. But it also depends on what the other person does, right? So you don't have you don't really have control over whether you get an outcome goal or not, or you only have partial control. And that's a really difficult place to be with motivation or motivational sort of influences, because if you don't achieve what you wanted, like say you say, I want to be on the podium for this particular race, right? And you don't, you could have had the best race of your season, of your life even. And it's just that, there were 3 other people who showed up that day and who also were having the best race of their life. And you came in 4th, and, it's pretty arbitrary that we have 3 people on the podium and 4th is somehow this really negative thing, right? And if you're really, really relying on outcome goals and this comparison, you can kind of put yourself in a place where that's like kind of harder than it has to be, right? And actually can be a bit demotivating for some people, depending how you feel about it, right? So I do want to just point that out. So outcome goals, not all bad, okay? They can do a lot for us, but they have this element of not being in our control that can sometimes undermine our motivation. Also, outcome goals are not a good focus when you are in the particular event. Okay, so I'll use the racing example first, then I'll give you kind of a parallel from the sort of the training example. So in a race situation, if you go in on race day and you're like, I want to win, and you hear this kind of like rhetoric out there, right? That's like, oh, this person just like wanted it more and therefore they won that day. If as an athlete you're sitting there and going like, I want to win, like on the start line or during the race, you aren't thinking about what you actually need to do to win, which is the process of doing it, okay? So outcome goals are not a good focus in the moment, okay? They can be good for some people in some circumstances, on that rainy day when you have to go out for the training run or something and you're like, oh, I'm doing this for the event that's coming up. Not so good in the moment. They tend to just sort of spike our anxiety or distract us away from the thing we need to do towards what we want to have happen at the end of that event. Okay? So, use with caution, right? Performance goals, how you compare to your own prior performances, those are a little better in terms of some of those pitfalls, right? They are more in your control, okay? Still not totally in your control. In fact, none of these are ever going to be 100% in your control, right? But they're more in your control than outcome goals because they don't depend on the other person's performance. Do keep in mind, of course, though, that the degree to which they are in your control depends a lot on how much other factors can influence your, the marker that you're going for. So just for example, if you are interested in your performance goal of getting a personal best on a particular Strava segment, right? Well, if today's a headwind day and on a road bike, for example, or it's sort of bad conditions on the mountain bike trail in a way that might slow you down, right? Or somebody else is in front of you that you have to pass, or things like that really change how long it takes you to get through that segment, right? You didn't necessarily have control over that, even though you are still measuring yourself based on your own time and not compared to someone else's time. So stuff can happen, right? But it is possible that none of those negative things happen, and you do have a chance to have like a sort of a fair run at trying to get a personal best, and you have that opportunity. So they can be a little less problematic in that way. Just like outcome goals, in the moment, if you're in that sort of racing situation, they're probably not your best focus, because if you're just sitting there, like if you knew you wanted to do something in some race in 25 minutes or something, sitting there on the start line going, I just want 25 minutes, I just want 25 minutes, is just a distraction, right? It's not really that meaningful in terms of how you perform. So again, probably not what you want to be thinking of at the moment. Okay? Process goals, on the other hand, are about how you do the thing, right? These you have actually a lot more control over, and they have a lot more to do with how you improve, how you get there. If you're focused on, for example, something around your technique, something around, just your mountain biking skills, right? And you're focused on those and you're trying to improve those are going to lead to you riding faster, to you comparing better with other people in those kind of outcome-based situations and that kind of thing too, right? So again, the technical and strategy goals, more in your control. A better focus during sort of a race or performance kind of situation, because it's actually drawing your focus to what you want to focus on. That's a little bit dependent, because if you're really, we're not really talking about race planning today, that's sort of a whole other topic, but you want to be intentional and careful about like which particular thing you're trying to think about or focus on in a race situation, because there are some process elements, if you focus on them, it might actually detract from your performance, okay? But there would be a process element that would be your best focus, whether it's a strategy piece, right? So just for example, you might not, if you have a skill that's really you're really good at, you wouldn't necessarily want to focus on that during the race because you'd be overthinking it, right? But there might be a strategic thing like something around your race plan or something that's a process element that would be a really good focus for you. But those are really dependent on your riding, where you are in your progression right now, but in terms of choosing which process element. But a process element would be, or a process goal would be a more appropriate focus in the moment when you're trying to perform. So I mentioned I wanted to go back and talk a little bit about how does this relate to outside of a sort of formal competition setting, because I used a few race examples because those are kind of the easy ones here. But if you think about just sort of that ride, right? And I know we don't always think this way, and some of us might tend to think this way a little bit more than others, and that's okay. But imagine if you were on a ride where you really did feel like you cared about, sort of being faster than somebody else, or keeping up with the group even, right? That's a comparison to others, right? If you are, say you start falling behind, right? And we've all been there, right? Other people are kind of having a better day than us, or this isn't like the trail that sort of speaks to our skills, or, maybe we chose to go out with a group that was, we were challenging ourselves and, we're hanging in there, but we're kind of falling back, right? And if we start to feel like kind of down on ourselves because we're not, riding as fast as other people, the more you focus on that, the more you're just getting in your head and getting distracted from how you ride, okay? So in that riding situation, we also don't really want that outcome goal. Again, though, that outcome goal of wanting to be able to keep up with the group might be a really positive motivation for you kind of overall in your general sort of sense. Like it's totally fine to want to, say, move up to a faster group, right? It's about comparing to others in some ways, right? But if that's sort of a driving motivation that's keeping you training and keeping you riding throughout the year, great. But in the moment, in the ride, try not to think about that, okay? But I know when we talked a few weeks ago, I mentioned something about saying try not to think about something usually means that we're going to focus on that a whole lot. So what should we think about instead, okay? Again, a performance goal would be a better thing to focus on in that situation. So thinking about, I want to see if I can ride my best, even if I'm kind of lagging behind the group, right? That might help keep you sort of engaged a little bit more. So again, like it might be that you have, a tracker on your phone or something that's timing you or that kind of thing. But even better, because thinking about your time isn't really helping you ride how you want to, okay? It might be less frustrating than thinking about the falling behind other people, okay? But the process goal, okay, thinking about the skills that you need to engage in or to, attend to so that you do sort of better, right, or improve on during that ride is probably how you're going to become the better rider, right? So I know for myself, okay, one of the things, I'm not as fast downhill, sort of compared to other people in some of the rides as I am uphill. So it's often on the downhill when I'm thinking about that. And I'll try and think about, some of the things around my body position that will help me feel, more stable and more in control going down the hill and allow me to push myself to go faster, right? So there's a real technical element about riding downhill, or I'll think about, some of the technique around doing turns going downhill, some of the things that I sometimes, sort of shy away from unless I'm intentionally trying to do. So for me, those are really good process elements to try and ride better with the group, and maybe they do result in me keeping up better with the group. But if I'm thinking about how I'm riding in the moment, that's going to be the better thing. So end of the day, it's not one of these are better than others overall. You probably want to have some of all three, but they're going to work together and they're going to work for you and help you at different points in time. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is, here we go. Some of the features of effective goals. And this is the part of what I'm going to talk about today that I know that probably a lot of people have seen before. And so I'm going to go through it fairly briefly. This this message about goals is out there in a lot of different ways. It's in goals in sport, goals in business, like all sorts of different things. But there's a ton of research out there that actually shows that setting goals that have these features tends to be associated with us engaging with them more and achieving them more. Okay? So the first one is setting goals that are specific. So identify exactly what it is you want to do, right? So if it's a technical kind of goal in that process category, like don't just make it like, I want to ride down the hill faster, okay? But what is it specifically that you want to do better, okay? Do you want to have like your weight back more, or is it that you want to be, well, I won't get into all the things it could be for you, right? But what is that specific technical thing that you might want to do, or that specific tactical thing you want to do? Or if it's a performance goal, right, that we're talking about, what is the time you want? Not just faster, right? But try and set a specific goal that you want to achieve. Okay. The second point is to make it measurable. This doesn't mean it necessarily has to be a quantity or a number. Okay. So especially some of the things around some of the process goals are like the technical elements are more like, are you doing it or not? Are you doing it, sort of better or not? But is it something that you can assess? Like, can you tell if it's better, right? So you might, maybe it's like you kind of rate yourself. Maybe it's that, if you were in a situation where you had like a coach or a riding partner who could like tell you if it looks like you're doing better, or if it could be something based on feel, but can you tell if it's better? And of course, it's going to be easier with those things that have numbers like time. Okay. But there are ways we can, sometimes it's even a yes, no, did I do it or not? Right. Action oriented. So you want your goal to be something that you do, not just sort of a general sense of how you want to be. Okay. It's fine to have a general sense of how you want to be, but in terms of trying to move yourself forward towards a goal, if you can identify it in terms of the action you want to take, then you are more likely to sort of understand how to get there because you've identified it, right? The next one is you want it to be realistic, but challenging. Okay, so realistic in the sense that you're not setting yourself up for certain failure, but also challenging in the sense that you want to push the envelope. Don't just make goals that are things you can already do, right? That's fine. There's probably some areas where you're just happy with how you do things and you continue on, right? But when we're talking about setting these goals and trying to improve our performance, is we want to set goals that push that envelope for us a little bit. This can be a really tricky balance to find. So the other thing I would suggest here is, especially if you're experimenting with this for the first time, but really always, is to also allow yourself flexibility. If you were to set, I'll just use the easy example of if you have a certain time you want to get on a Strava segment, right? And you've identified a number. If you're finding that after sort of tracking yourself for a while, that just seems really out of reach in the timeline, and I'll talk about that in a second, that you've identified, you might want to rescale your goal, right? Be flexible with it. Because again, we're not trying to just set ourselves up for failure. You don't want to just, the idea here is to set up a goal that you're reaching for and that you're not just moving the bar to adjust to however you're doing that day. But there are definitely times when it's like, oh, I've actually learned a little bit more about goal setting, or learned a little bit more about my riding. And, I did set that goal, but it's really not that realistic. So change it. Okay. Or something happens, right? Probably a lot of us had goals about things we wanted to do this summer, and that might not happen because of the conditions. Instead of sort of just wallowing in, I'm not going to achieve my goal, change the goal. Okay, you have the power to do that. This comes up a lot too with injury. It can be really, really, you all know, it's frustrating to be injured, right? And one of the things that's really hard is sort of that knowledge that you're not going to maybe achieve some of the goals that you set out to achieve. But if you set new goals that might be achievable, given the new circumstances, that can sort of help you get back into feeling more motivated. And then the last one here, timeline. The most effective goals have a timeline built in. So you've identified when you want to achieve it by, and so that it's not just sort of this diffuse thing that like, well, maybe someday, right? That's part of what kind of drives us forward to get on it right now. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about before we finish up today is an idea of sort of having a goal plan. So it might be that what we've talked about already is plenty for you, and just thinking about like maybe a particular goal you want and thinking about it in a new way, and that's great. A next step you could take is to think about setting up multiple goals that kind of work together that help you get you where you want to go. And so I'll just talk about a couple of things you could think about if you're thinking about it this way. This is something that a lot of people will do on maybe an annual basis. So they'll sort of think this through for the year, or if you have some kind of timeline cycle that makes sense for you, right? Like if there's an event that's coming up in 2 years or 3 years or whatever, right? You might think about it as a multi-year kind of thing. Okay, but what long-term is really up to you. It depends on what it is you're trying to achieve and when you expect that to happen. But let's just talk about it in terms of 1 year right now, just for example's sake, okay? A good place to start is to think about what is it that you want to achieve in the long term. So what do you want to achieve this year, okay? And one recommendation that people have given is to think about, to kind of set 3 goals that you want to make in that year when you're making this overall goal plan. So the first thing is, what's your dream goal? Like this one might not be really realistic, but what would make you really happy? What would you like just be like thrilled if you managed to get there? Knowing that you might not, okay, but kind of that daring to dream for this goal, okay? So identifying a dream goal. The next one is the one that's really what I was talking about before, is that realistic yet challenging goal, okay? So what's the point you want to be at the end of the year that you think you could do, but that really pushes your envelope, okay? And then the third one is more of an acceptance goal, okay? So knowing that life can change and things could happen, or that even if you tried your hardest, you're doing stuff that's trying to challenge yourself and really push yourself, knowing you might not quite get there, okay? What's your goal in terms of what would you accept, okay? Like what would you still be okay with or still be happy with? And I know I've been in this situation a lot. I have some experience in my past as a competitive athlete, actually in kayaking. And this happens a lot, right? Like where you set out a goal, it's something you want to achieve, and you just don't quite get there. And especially when you're dealing with those outcome goals, right? Where you have all these factors that aren't in your control. But it can be really helpful to be like, to have this sort of bar that you're like, no, but I'm good with this, right? It wasn't what I really wanted. It wasn't what I was pushing myself for, but I'm still going to be happy with this. Okay. Another one I don't have written down here that can kind of go in there too. Some people do encourage, if you're making a plan like this, to kind of make a note that you're always going to accept yourself, whatever you achieve or whatever happens. And to have maybe a 4th level here that's like, no matter what, you are good and worthy kind of goal. Okay. So that's the long-term goal. So that's sort of just getting that long-term target in place. Then what we talk about in terms of goal plans is creating a bunch of short-term goals that are building blocks or stepping stones towards that long-term goal. And usually we set these ones up relative to that realistic yet challenging goal, that middle goal from the long-term set, okay? You might think about this, again, the timeline of what short term is can depend on all sorts of factors and what makes sense for your goal. But for example, you might have a goal for each sort of season of the year, right? Because maybe with mountain biking, you're not on your mountain bike in Calgary in the winter, right? But you might have sort of some short-term goals that you want to achieve during the winter that help you get to that goal in the summer, at the end of the summer, and that long-term goal. Okay? So you might have maybe seasonal goals. Maybe within that you have monthly goals that help you get to that seasonal goal. All of these, though, should be relative to the long-term goal. So say you had like a time that you wanted to achieve in a year and you were breaking it down into monthly goals. It's like, how much faster do you need to get each month to, at the end of the year, be at your goal, okay? And then once you have those monthly goals, each week, if you want it, you don't have to do all these levels, but you could get this fine-grained, right? What would you have to do each week to get to the monthly goal? And then you could even have daily goals. Okay. The degree to which people really engage in this and get detailed like that is going to depend on, what they're trying to achieve, and also their, the amount of time and commitment they're putting into the activity. Like a lot of really elite athletes will think about this like day to day, right? A lot of us who are doing more recreational riding probably aren't like, spelling out our daily goals, right? But having, maybe having a more realistic set, like what is it I want to achieve this month? Maybe a couple of things that are, a couple of weeks within that month could be really helpful, right? And helping us get there. What the short-term goals really, really help us do is it allows us to be achieving something along the way, which is really motivating, okay? One of the big ideas with goal setting is the chance to achieve goals is something that helps us build motivation and build confidence. So if you have a goal each week and you're achieving those, you're going to feel like, I can get to this annual goal. I'm going to make it there, right? The other thing it allows us to do is know how we're doing, so that if we do need to make some of those adjustments along the way, we can, right? So if we notice, in month one that like, ooh, that 1 year goal seems to be a way off, right? Because we're kind of paying attention, we can know that we might be able to make some adjustments, either adjustments to what we're doing so that we do get there, or adjustments to the target if it's turned out to be that we learn it's not very realistic. All right, so I'm going to stop there. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you have some great writing, and I hope this is helpful in helping you adjust and shift as our conditions adjust and shift, to have some goals in mind that might help you achieve the things you want this summer. All right, take care.